Hi there, this is David and welcome to the Dragon Quest vs. Final Fantasy Battle Royale. Here, I'll be pitting each numeric entry in the series against each other to see which franchise will come out on top. However, because Dragon Quest is a bit behind on releases, with only 11 to Final Fantasy's 15, I'll only be covering the first 11 entries of each franchise. So, let's get this competition started. For our first match, we have Dragon Quest I, released for the NES in 1986, versus Final Fantasy I, released for the NES in 1987. While the first Dragon Quest pretty much started a genre all of its own, the game is just a victim of its age. It's extremely cryptic on what you have to do or where you have to go. Personally, I remember being stuck for well over a year trying to find Garen's tomb in the Silver Harp. Coincidentally, my friend Mark happened to be playing the game and showed me how to do it. I mean, that's nigh on impossible when you're 7 years old. Coming out a full year later and with so much more to offer, I have to give the win to Final Fantasy. It's just light years ahead of its time with multiple party members, a class system complete with promotions, as well as multiple vehicles to fully explore the world. Remember that feeling that you get when you first reach Crescent Lake and you decide whether or not you want to go after Carrie or get the airship and all the goodies that go along with it? Dragon Quest just can't compare. And well, yes, it was groundbreaking in its own right. Square's Juggernaut series opener just knocks it out of the park. So the winner? Final Fantasy. For our next match, we have Dragon Quest II released for the NES in 1987 versus Final Fantasy II released for the NES in 1988. Here we have a match between the two Black Sheep sequels. It's actually a rather funny case because we're comparing two of the worst games in their respective series. Both are known for their open world gameplay and punishing difficulty, but I have to say that the better game is Dragon Quest II by a landslide. While Final Fantasy II tried to have a grandiose story, it failed in every other way, especially where it mattered most, the fun factor. That HP, weapon, and magic grind just killed it. Dragon Quest II, while buggy and unbalanced at times, is at least playable, memorable, and ties in nicely to the other games in the trilogy. The introduction of 3 party members and the boat opens up a world of strategy not seen in the first game, and honestly, you can dedicate an entire summer to delving deep into the game's secrets, lore, and world. I know that I did. So the winner? Dragon Quest II. Up next, we have Dragon Quest III released for the NES in 1988 versus Final Fantasy III released for the NES in 1990. Fun fact, Dragon Quest III only came out about 2 months after the first Final Fantasy, and here we're pitting it against a game that came out a full 2 years later. The battle of the job classes begins here. Learning from their mistakes in the previous games, the developers created multiple worlds to shock and surprise players, and gave much needed variety in combat by introducing choice through multiple job classes. Both are great games, but I have to give the nod to Dragon Quest III. This is mostly because Final Fantasy III has some issues, like the uselessness of about half the job classes, and dungeons where you have to be minied or toted to go through. On the other hand, Dragon Quest III just does everything perfectly, from its groundbreaking story wrapping up the Erdrick trilogy, to introducing concepts and locations, magic, jobs, and weapons that we still use today. Dragon Quest III established lasting series traditions, and I think that's a big reason why it has such staying power. So the winner? Dragon Quest III. Now, releasing on 2 different systems, we have Dragon Quest IV for the NES in 1990 versus Final Fantasy IV released for the SNES in 1991. I wish that I could give ties, but that would be a cop-out, and I'm not doing that here. Both are just fantastic in their own right, because they both branched out and tried something new and different, breaking the mold of the genre. Dragon Quest IV had an innovative chapter system, tiny metal collectibles, and 8 party members that you could swap out at any time, even during battle. That feature wasn't put into any Final Fantasy game until the 10th installment. However, not being able to control your party members in Chapter 5 really kinda sucked, and because of that, Final Fantasy IV gets the ever so slight edge over Dragon Quest IV. While Square tried to put together a coherent plot for Final Fantasy II on the NES, it didn't really work. Here on the SNES though, they've hit their stride and the plot takes center stage. You really get to know your characters and their motivations. With Square's wise decision to release their 4th game on the superior SNES, it technically and graphically blows Dragon Quest out of the water. It's a benchmark game. As one of the first RPGs released on the system, many other games were compared to it, and plenty of early releases fell short because Square set the bar so high. This was the first game in the series that really focused on character development, the relationship between various kingdoms, and the struggle for the crystals. The key to its success was getting the player emotionally involved in the epic story, spanning 3 worlds with multiple party members who were much more than just their basic job class. The winner? Final Fantasy IV. And now for my favorites. Dragon Quest V, released for the SNES in 1992, versus Final Fantasy V, released for the SNES also in 1992. It took 5 entries, but here's where the Final Fantasy series caught up with Dragon Quest. Afterwards, though, Dragon Quest slowed their releases down dramatically, while Final Fantasy continued at a breakneck speed. Anyway, remember what I said about those ties? This is probably the hardest face-off in the entire lineup. For all the other ones, it was pretty easy for me to decide a winner, but here I just love them both so much, mostly because they both have insane replay value due to the way that you can modify your party. Dragon Quest, with its choice of wife and monster capturing, and Final Fantasy with its intricate job class system. The story couldn't be more different though. Barts in the game just kind of bumble on through the worlds, wreaking havoc, destroying kingdoms, crystals, and towns as they go, while the hero of Dragon Quest V is probably the most emotionally draining journey of the entire series, growing old and navigating tragedy as he has to avenge his father, rescue his mother, escape from slavery, and be a father to his kids. It really tugs at your heartstrings. They're both fantastic, but I have to give the win to Dragon Quest V as the game had me emotionally invested right from the start. So the winner, Dragon Quest V. Next match, Dragon Quest VI, released for the SNES in 1995, versus Final Fantasy VI, released for the SNES in 1994. While the last match was won by a hair's breadth, this one isn't close at all. Final Fantasy VI blows the competition out of the water. While Dragon Quest VI is interesting in its concept, that only lasts for roughly the first third of the game, when you're just wondering who you are and why the world is split. However, after a certain event, it quickly devolves into a boring grindfest, where all you do is go from town to town solving the problems until you reach the end. However, the same can't be said of Terra's adventure of self-discovery. Unraveling the mystery of her origins, while also attempting to put a stop to Kefka's ambitions, will have you glued to your seat from the get-go. The second half of Final Fantasy VI is pretty controversial. Some people don't like it because it's not as structured or there isn't as much story, but that's exactly the reason why I do like it. I love the open-endedness of it, the optional challenges, and the additional character development everyone receives. Square really went out on a limb with the Magicite customization system because prior to this, each game pretty much only used job classes and equipment to differentiate the characters. But the gamble paid off in spades by allowing tons of replayability and self-imposed challenges. So the winner? Final Fantasy VI. With both franchises moving to Sony, our next match is Dragon Quest VII, released for the PlayStation in 2000, versus Final Fantasy VII, also released for the PlayStation in 1997. The dichotomy of these two entries couldn't be more different. Dragon Quest VII plays pretty much exactly like the previous entry in the series, sticking to the tried and true formula of grinding out job levels and going from town to town to solve everyone's little problems. Even though it was released very late in the PlayStation's life cycle, it looks more like an SNES game and truly sticks to its roots. Square, on the other hand, went an entirely different direction, releasing relatively early in the PlayStation's life cycle and utilizing it to its fullest potential would prove to be a wise move. Final Fantasy VII boasts a breathtaking story, fantastic score, and one of the best customization systems ever designed, even if its graphics are much more dated than the more traditional Dragon Quest. If you couldn't tell by now, Final Fantasy VII beats out the competition in just about every way possible, especially in the fun factor. Like 6, Dragon Quest VII can be a grindy slog, but Square's masterpiece is nothing of the sort. While Final Fantasy VI got their feet wet experimenting with different magic systems and steampunk settings, it was still more medieval than anything else. But this marks Square's true departure from all of that, where they ditched the job classes, firmly set their stories in a mix of fantasy and steampunk, and didn't look back. Though, maybe they wish that they did for their next entry. The winner? Final Fantasy VII. With Dragon Quest releases severely slowing down, we now have Dragon Quest VIII released for the PS2 in 2004, versus Final Fantasy VIII released for the regular PlayStation in 1999. Dragon Quest is now averaging 1 release per console generation, while Square is still releasing 3 Final Fantasies per console. This really works against Square here because Dragon Quest VIII knocks it out of the park in their PS2 debut. While Final Fantasy was never scared of experimentation, it seemed that Dragon Quest was trapped in the past, and never was this more apparent than in the previous entry. However, they really embraced the modern era here. Gone are the job systems, replaced with skill trees based upon your weapons. Gone is the 2D world. Instead, it's vivacious and inviting and filled with characters who actually have individuality. Final Fantasy VIII, though, decided to fully embrace a futuristic setting and left all their history in the dust, and with it, what made the series great. Customization boils down to drawing magic, equipping summons, and junctioning magic to stats. Your party members have nothing to differentiate themselves from each other except for their insipid personalities, and graphically, it's futuristic, ugly, and boring. Oh, and the way that you earn money? Thank God they never did that again. At least the card game was fun. While the 5th matchup was probably the closest, this match is probably the easiest for me to call. There's just no contest between the two. The winner, Dragon Quest VIII. Here we have the first portable releases with Dragon Quest IX on the DS in 2009 versus Final Fantasy IX released for the PlayStation in 2000. Here's another relatively close match, with another abrupt change. However, this time Final Fantasy is returning to their roots, while Dragon Quest goes out on a limb, both in the console choice and gameplay. The designers went so far as to state that the combat would be action-based, but fan outcry made them keep it turn-based. I love the Angel storyline, but I don't like that they dropped set party members for nameless avatars, and the MMO elements as well as the crafting can go die in a fire. Square, on the other end, learned from their mistakes. After the disaster that was 8, 9 goes back to the basics for one final hurrah, in just about everything. It's glorious, and they brought the crystals back with a vengeance. Gone are the hyper-realistic graphics, annoying stat system, emo, boring party members, and nonsensical plot. Instead, we're treated to a love letter of all the games that came before, with nods and references to them, and the battle system reverts back to a 4-person party with a simple yet ingenious skill system based upon what equipment you have on. The soundtrack is whimsical, and the storyline moving with bits of humor thrown in. It's a masterpiece, and the best in the entire series as far as I'm concerned. The winner, Final Fantasy IX. Next up, Dragon Quest X released for the Wii in 2012 versus Final Fantasy X, released for the PlayStation 2 in 2001. It really pains me to do this because I've heard such good things about Dragon Quest X, but since Square Enix in all their wisdom decided not to release it here, I have to have Final Fantasy X win by default. This is a crying shame because I don't really like the game. You're cut back down to 3 party members who you're constantly switching in and out of battle for AP and experience purposes. The dungeons and overworld areas are pretty much a linear path up until the Calm Lands, and Tidus gets on my last fricking nerve. That being said, I do like the tropical setting and the kind of post-apocalyptic thing that they have going on, but I also don't like the inhabitants of Spira, namely the NPC summoners, guardians, and townfolk that you run into. They're all just so obnoxious. The Spira grid system is nice, but it eventually devolves into everyone can do everything, which I hate. For those unaware, Dragon Quest X is the MMO addition to the series, and while I don't really like MMOs, I would definitely give this one a shot, especially because there's a single-player story quest in an offline mode, so you can play it just like you would any other Dragon Quest game. Here's to hoping Nintendo decides to re-release Dragon Quest X on the Switch in the West, so we can get a proper competition and the full series officially translated. The winner, Final Fantasy X. 15 years apart. Wow. Here we have Dragon Quest XI released for the PlayStation 4 in 2017 versus Final Fantasy XI released for multiple systems in 2002. At least these two were released worldwide. Final Fantasy XI is an EverQuest-inspired, streamlined MMO, and as such, it requires a lot of investment, both in time and in money. At times, these games can feel like a second job where you sit around looking for a group for hours on end, only to grind obsessively whenever you do find one. Back in the day when I was single and had all the time in the world, I personally played Asheron's Call, EverQuest, EverQuest 2, World of Warcraft, and Final Fantasy XI. I was addicted from about 1999 to 2003, so here's some real talk. Nowadays, you couldn't pay me to play these games again. I could just kick myself whenever I look back on the hours of pointless grinding, money wasted on subscriptions and expansions, real-world relationships damaged, and poor grades because of my online gaming addiction. It's just not worth it. Oh, and corpse retrieval and loss of experience when you die? Screw that. With all that being said, I do remember Final Fantasy XI fondly, but I can't nominate it as the winner in good conscience, so I'm going to Dragon Quest XI. They took everything that made 8 great and expanded on it. The storyline is tight, the graphics are sharp, and the plot's full of twists and turns. I love the skill tree system, the different cultures in each town, and the expansive world, and it features the best character in the entire series, Sylvando. I mean, how can you go wrong when he's on your side? The winner? Dragon Quest XI. For those keeping track, Final Fantasy won 6-5. And with that, we've hit the end of the mainline Dragon Quest series. Let's hope that the releases speed up so that I can do another proper competition video between the two Juggernaut series, because at this rate, it's going to take another 30 years before we get to Dragon Quest XX. This has been David. If you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a good day.